My name is Steve Taylor, and I am Senior Vice President and Counsel for Public Policy at United Way Worldwide.
United Way is a great organization. Your Twitter bio says something very interesting. Quote, 9 years of learning more about tax policy than I ever wanted to know, end quote. How you feeling these days, buddy?
That's right. Yeah, it is. It has been interesting.
Yeah.
I worked on Capitol Hill for 10 years, but I never once did tax policy. And now being off the Hill, working for a nonprofit and working on tax policy all the time is something I did not expect.
So you've probably heard of the United Way. It is a charity. It has local branches all across America, and in fact, in every single congressional district. It supports programs to limit things like teen pregnancy, fight domestic violence, all sorts of worthy causes. And they benefit from the charitable deduction. So a change to the standard deduction, that could really be a problem for them.
So every year, Americans give billions of dollars to charity. In fact, in 2016, Americans gave $282 billion to charities. But ever since the income tax was created 100 years ago, lawmakers in Washington believed that people should not be taxed on donations that they're making to charity. And so early on, they created the charitable deduction. Under the proposal that has been circulated, instead of 33% of taxpayers itemizing, only about 5% of taxpayers will itemize. The charitable deduction is only available to people who itemize. So what that means is a huge chunk of people who currently have access to the charitable deduction will lose the charitable deduction. We actually know the number. 28 million people who currently take the charitable deduction will become non-itemizers and no longer have access to the charitable deduction. That would especially devastate charities that rely on donations from those middle-class taxpayers.
So if they change the way you do the itemization, or they change the way you fundamentally file your tax returns, is that going to affect charitable giving, i.e. the United Way getting money from Americans?
This is exactly what United Way is concerned about. In the draft proposals on tax reform, the lawmakers have said a number of times that they're going to preserve the charitable deduction.
We are keeping the charitable deduction on the postcard. More than that, we are working with charitable organizations to explore ways to unlock more charitable giving.
So the idea that the charitable deduction was something that couldn't be touched, they sort of paid lip service to that by saying we're going to preserve the charitable deduction. But they won't tell you is that the vast majority of people who currently itemize their taxes and therefore have access to the charitable deduction, most of those folks will no longer itemize their taxes. Mm-hmm. So even though technically the charitable deduction still exists, a tiny group of taxpayers will still have access to it.
I mean, would that cripple the United Way in the work that you do?
Well, the people who currently itemize their taxes and take the charitable deduction and who would lose that deduction, those are the heart and soul of United Way's donors.
And I have to assume that for the entire not-for-profit sector out there that do charitable work, it would devastate them as well.
Absolutely. And this really goes to the charities that provide basic needs, social services, and disaster relief. Those charities rely very heavily on middle-class donors. Now, some of these kind of elite upper-income donors and taxpayers who will still itemize, it's projected to be about 5% of taxpayers will still itemize. I don't want to diminish their charitable contributions. So those folks are making really substantial charitable gifts. They tend to be more towards their university or hospitals, different kinds of charitable giving. The working class, the middle class folks who are out there just working in day-to-day jobs, in United Way's case, they're giving small donations every couple of weeks out of their paycheck. Those are middle class folks, many of whom are just out in middle America. They may own a modest house and they're just kind of getting by, and they're giving a few $100s every year to their favorite charity. Those are the folks who are going to lose a charitable deduction under this tax proposal.
So then my question is this. If United Way stands to lose so much, and it sounds like they would, what are you going to do about it? What have you been doing about it?
Oh my gosh, so I'm here at United Way's headquarters, and we're in Washington, D.C. area, and we have been up on Capitol Hill just sort of nonstop for months trying to get this message across to lawmakers. What I think has really been impactful has been our local United Ways who are out. We have 1,150 local United Ways spread out all across the country. There's a United Way in every single congressional district. And those United Ways, their staff, their stakeholders, their board members, who are often community leaders, have been reaching out to their members of Congress, calling attention to the challenge that's going to be created, and asking for help and asking Congress for relief.
Have you got any pushback from members of Congress, considering that there is a local United Way affiliate in every single congressional district?
Well, I'm sorry to say that it doesn't look like we have made any real progress on these efforts. When we go into congressional offices, and it's both Democrats and Republicans, they're very supportive of charities. They talk about how they support charities and how they want to help us. A lot of them have personal stories about the charity that they have been involved in. But then when we get down to the nitty gritty about the challenges that this tax bill is going to create for us, we just have not really had any relief.
If you're a proponent of tax reform, I mean, I would assume that you're going to say, look, people are still going to give. It's not like their consciences tell them to stop giving. You and I both worked on Capitol Hill. You've been on both sides of arguments before. What would you say to a member? If I'm a member and I just said that to you, how would you respond to that?
Well, what I'd say is you are correct. People will still give, but people will give less. There has been, because the charitable deduction has been around for so long, it has been studied for decades. Academics and economists have studied the impact of tax incentives on charitable giving. And the evidence is really overwhelming. It's not some evidence, it's not most evidence, it is all empirical evidence proves that charitable giving is incentivized by tax policy. And so the data just shows it. And then on top of that, every charity that goes up to Capitol Hill can give anecdotal evidence of that. Huge dollars are donated on December 31st every year. Mm-hmm. And the only rational explanation for that is that people are trying to get their gifts in under the wire so that they can claim the charitable deduction.